The sign in the window had not been changed in 11 years. Repairs while you wait. The paint was fading at the edges, the red gone to pink, and the street outside had changed around it the way streets do. A parking structure where the feed store used to be. A discount appliance shop where the hardware man had stood since 1939. But the sign was still there. September 1961, Yuma, Arizona. A town that ran on cotton and copper and the steady flat heat that most people drove through without stopping. The kind of place where the work that got done without anyone much noticing, because that was the point of it. A man was on his knees in the back of the shop, behind the counter, tacking a heel. Nobody else was in there. Out on the sidewalk, a car sat with its engine cooling. Here is the story. His name was Del Calder, and he had been making and repairing boots in that shop since 1950. 11 years in one room. He had learned the trade from his father, who had learned it in Tucson from a man who came up from Sonora in the 20s and knew the leather the way other men know horses. By feel, by instinct, by a kind of patience that takes years to develop and a lifetime to keep. Del had that patience. He was 53 years old, and his hands showed it. The palms were calloused at the heel, and the fingers moved through the stitching work the way water moves downhill, without having to think about it. He had a daughter in Phoenix, 22, studying to be a teacher. He had a son, Marcus, 17, who wanted nothing to do with the shop, which Del understood without resentment the way a man understands weather. He had a wife named Helen, who had died in 1956 of something the doctors could name but couldn't do much about. And he had kept the shop going through that, and through the 2 slow years that followed it, because the shop was the only other thing that had stayed the same when everything else hadn't. The trouble was the kind of trouble that doesn't announce itself until it is already through the door. 3 new shops had opened on the east side of Yuma in the last 4 years. A Sears that did shoe repair at the counter. A discount outfit run by 2 brothers from El Paso who charged half what Del charged and used hardware from a catalog. The custom work had dropped off. The walk-in repairs were dropping now, too. A man named Gilbert Pruitt had been by twice in August, representing a commercial building concern out of Phoenix, carrying a briefcase and wearing a tie in 90-degree heat. He was polite. That was the worst part. He had explained, with the quiet courtesy of a man who has done this many times, that the building was going to be bought, renovated, and subdivided into 3 storefronts at triple the current rent. The current lease had 6 months remaining. He had left a card both times. The second time, he had mentioned that there were other units in the building, that the building concern preferred not to let things drag out, that there was a figure on the table that would make the remainder of the lease more comfortable for everyone. The figure was on a folded piece of paper in Del's shirt pocket now. It was $400. For 11 years, Del had been paying $75 a month for this room. He had $112 in his account. He had not told his daughter. He was tacking that heel when the bell above the door moved. The man who came in was broad through the shoulders, wearing a canvas jacket over a plain work shirt, the sleeves rolled to the forearms. He had on a tan Stetson with trail dust on the brim. He was tall enough that he had to account for the doorframe, and did so without looking at it. He moved to the counter and set both hands flat on the glass and looked through it at the boots on display. 3 pair. 2 of them Del's own work from the 50s. One a repair job waiting for pickup that had been waiting 3 weeks because the owner had moved to Tucson without leaving a forwarding address. Del came out from the back and wiped his hands on his apron. The man said he needed resoling on a pair of boots. He had them in the car. He could come back in an hour for them, or he could wait. He spoke without hurry, the way a man speaks when the question genuinely doesn't matter to him either way. Del said an hour was fine. The man went out and came back with the boots in his hand. Dell looked at them and turned them over. Good boots. Old ones. The sole had separated at the toe on the left, and the heel on the right was worn down to the welt. "You've been wearing these through something," Dell said. 6 weeks of location, the man said. New Mexico. A lot of adobe and rock. Dell nodded. He set the boots on the counter and started writing up the ticket. "You make those?" the man said. He meant the pair in the case. The ones from the 50s, Dell said he had. The man was quiet for a moment, studying them. Then he said, "What are they worth?" Dell told him. The man nodded once without surprise, the way a man nods when the number confirms something he already suspected. Dell set the ticket on the counter. The man signed it and sat down in the single chair along the wall and picked up a magazine that was 2 years old without looking at what it was. The hour passed the way hours pass in shops like that. The sound of the radio low, the tap of the hammer, the occasional car outside on the street. Dell worked. The man read, or seemed to. At some point, Dell noticed the man wasn't reading, he was looking at the walls. Dell had things on the walls, his father's tools mounted, a photograph of his father's shop in Tucson. A leather panel his father had tooled with a pattern of running horses that Dell couldn't do himself, and had always meant to learn. The man looked at these things with a particular kind of attention that Dell had seen before, in people who understood what they were looking at. Pruitt came in at 1/4 past the hour. He had a second man with him this time, a younger one who stayed by the door and didn't speak. Pruitt set his briefcase on the counter and opened it and took out a folder, and he explained, the way he had explained before, that the building concern needed a decision, that the timeline had moved, that the 6 months had become, due to certain renovations already contracted, 60 days. He was sorry for the change in circumstances. He was always sorry. He placed a new figure on the counter, $300 this time, not $400, because the timeline shift had affected the building concern's flexibility, and he put it down the way you put down something you expect to pick up again shortly. Dell stood at his counter and looked at the folder. The man in the chair hadn't moved. Pruitt said that Dell seemed like a reasonable man, and that reasonable men understood how these things worked. He said this without cruelty, which was the whole of it. He said that there were options. The building concern could make referrals. There were other properties on the east side, smaller footprints, lower overhead. He said the word transition twice. He had a pen in his hand. The young man by the door shifted his weight. Dell said he needed to think about it. Pruitt said, of course. He put the folder in his briefcase. He said he'd need to know by Friday. This was Tuesday. If you have ever stood on the wrong side of a counter while a man in a tie closed his briefcase, drop a comment below. This one is for the people who stayed at their work when the world told them the work didn't matter anymore. The chair scraped. It scraped slow and deliberate across the tile floor. That particular sound, which is not quite a scrape and not quite a drag, but something between the two. The sound of something heavy being moved without hurry. The man in the canvas jacket stood up. And he was a large man when he stood, larger than the room seemed to have space for. He set the magazine on the chair. He walked across the shop the way a man walks when the hard part has already been decided. Not fast, not slow, just forward, with the particular quality of forward that doesn't invite argument. He stopped beside Dell at the counter, not in front of Pruitt, beside Dell. The difference was not lost on anyone in the room. He looked at the folder in Pruitt's briefcase. "What's the figure?" he said. Pruitt looked at him. He did not yet know who he was looking at, and in that moment the not knowing was irrelevant. The voice was reason enough. That's a private matter between, what's the figure? The second man by the door had gone very still. Pruitt said it. $300. The man in the canvas jacket looked at Dell. How much to own it? The building. Dell said he had no idea what the building was worth. That it wasn't for sale. That if it were for sale, the man said. The building. Dell had heard a number from somewhere. He said it. Around 10,000. The man looked at Pruitt. Get me the owner's number. Pruitt said the building concern didn't typically. I'm not asking what you typically do, the man said. His voice had not gone up. It had gone down. Get me the number. Pruitt wrote a number on the back of one of his cards and put it on the counter. He closed his briefcase. He and the young man left without the folder. The bell above the door moved and was still. Del Calder stood at the counter. He did not know what to say, and so he said nothing. He picked up the card and looked at the number on the back of it. The man went to the phone on the wall. He made 2 calls. The first was short. The second was longer, mostly listening with 2 or 3 words at intervals. When he was done, he stood for a moment with his hand still on the receiver, then came back to the counter. He said, "Your boots, I'll be ready." Dell said, "What did you?" "I need custom work," the man said. "I've been wearing factory boots for 6 weeks on Rock and Adobe, and I'm going to be on that location 4 more weeks. I need something built for that." He paused. "You're solving my problem." Del Calder was 53 years old, and he had been doing this work since 1950. And he understood, from the particular way a man states the terms of a transaction, the difference between a man asking for something and a man giving something. He understood what this was. He did not say so. Neither did the man across the counter. The man reached into his jacket and put money on the counter. He counted it out flat. It came to $3,000. "Half on the custom work," he said. "Half for the building." Dell said, "Mister, I can't. I have a problem," the man said. "You can fix it. That's not charity. That's commerce." He picked up the receipt for the resulting job, folded it once, and put it in his shirt pocket. "I'll be back in an hour," he said. He was. Dell had the boots done. The man tried them, walked across the shop twice, said they were right, and left. Dell went to the window and watched the car pull away from the curb. He stood there after it was gone. He stood there a while longer after that. The man's name, which Dell did not know when the man was standing in his shop, which he learned only when he walked to the window and saw the car and the man who leaned against it to pull on the repaired boots, and the young woman who had been waiting at the passenger door, said the name the way you say a name when you still cannot quite account for it, was John Wayne. Del Calder made the calls the next morning. There were 3 of them, and they took most of the day, and by Friday of that week the building concern had been contacted by a law firm in Los Angeles, and by the following Wednesday the matter of the lease and the proposed sale had been resolved in Dell's favor. The particulars were never made public. The building was not sold. The rent did not change. Del Calder ran that shop for 22 more years until 1983. He did custom boot work for 15 of those years, ranchers, hands, a few people who came specifically for the quality and didn't mind the wait. He trained his son Marcus, who had wanted nothing to do with the shop at 17, and who at 25 came back from Phoenix without explaining why, and stayed. They worked side by side for 9 years. Marcus took over in 1977 when Dell's hands began to show the miles in them. He ran the shop until 1991. Marcus Calder had one rule he kept from the day he took over. He never told a customer where the money for the original lease dispute had come from. people asked occasionally, there was a local paper that ran a story in 1968. And the story mentioned a benefactor, and people speculated. Marcus would say that someone had helped his father once and that his father had been the kind of man who paid debts quietly, and he would leave it at that. That was how he understood what had happened. He did not know if it was accurate. He thought it was. The daughter, Patricia Calder, who became a teacher in Phoenix in 1963, wrote a letter to John Wayne's production company in 1972. She did not know if it would reach him. She wanted someone to know what had happened, because she thought the record should reflect it. She did not receive a reply. She kept a carbon copy of the letter in her desk drawer for the rest of her life. When her son cleaned out her house in 2009, he found it there, unfolded, as if it had been read not long before. On the wall of the Calder shop, through all of it, through Dell's years and Marcus's years, through the signage changes and the single renovation in 1972, there hung a leather panel that Dell's father had tooled in Tucson sometime in the 40s. Running horses. The kind of work that takes years to learn and a lifetime to keep. In the afternoon, when the light came through the west window the way it does in Arizona in October, it moved across those horses the way light moves across good things left standing. John Wayne never told anyone what he did in that shop in Yuma in September of 1961. Not his director. Not his co-stars. Not in any interview anybody recorded. Not in any letter anybody ever turned up. The transaction does not appear in any account of his life that was published during it. The money was never mentioned. The calls were never mentioned. He went back to New Mexico the same day and finished the location work in the boots Del Calder had made him, and as far as anyone could tell from the outside, nothing had happened that afternoon, except a man had gotten his boots resoled. There is a particular kind of man who walks into a room and notices the one person in it that the room has decided not to see. Not because someone told him to look, not because there is an audience for the noticing, because he is the kind of man who notices, and what you notice is, in the end, the full account of who you are. The measure of a man is not what he does when people are watching. It is what he does when the only witness is the one who will carry it without being asked to. If this story found you, pass it to someone who needs it. Subscribe if you haven't. There are more of these, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.